Hi again, Liz Thompson from Sew with Liz, and I'm here with another short video on, actually this video might be a little longer because I'm going to go through all the steps at the sewing machine to show you how to make a granny square with your leftover bits of quilting fabric. So this is what you're going to make. This is what I call a granny square, and this one was made with, I do believe, if I remember correctly, 8-inch squares, but it doesn't have to be 8-inch squares. They can be smaller. So I'm going to show you how to do them with 5-inch charm packs, which will make a smaller mat. This could be a mug rug. It could be, if you make it with smaller squares, it can be a mug rug. It could be a coaster, which is just really another name for a mug rug. And then you can also join them all together and make table runners and placemats, anything along those lines. And so I will show you at the machine how you get from squares of fabric to this finished Quilt-As-You-Go granny square. Hi, we are at the machine, and what I've done is I have chosen 4 of my 5-inch charm squares in those packs, and what we're now going to do is we are going to sew these together with 1/4 inch. Now I have a black cotton thread in my bobbin, and what I have in my needle is a polyester embroidery thread. Now the reason for this is that I don't want to be changing, for photographic reasons, I don't want to be changing threads in the middle of my project. So I have just threaded up with that. Because it's polyester, it will be just fine. If it was rayon embroidery thread, that wouldn't really be fine because it's not a very strong thread. It's beautiful, but it is delicate. So I would prefer a polyester embroidery thread if I am not going to be using polyester or cotton sewing thread or quilting thread. So what I have now done is I have sewn 2 seams down, 1/4 inch seams down my 2 blocks. And so now I have got 2 blocks there and 2 blocks there. And at this point I go to the iron, and I iron those pieces together, or rather I iron those pieces, and you do want to make sure that you pay attention to which way you have your seams ironed, because you want your seams to nest in like that, and I'm hoping you can see it. You want them to nest in like that, where the seam allowance is going one way for the one side and the other way for the other side. All right, so I have actually done that already, and my seams are nesting really nicely. And so I have my 4 blocks, and now what I need to do is I need to sew 1/4 inch again down the other seam, and this is to sew the 2 sets of 2 blocks together. All right, you heard that little sound as it went over the middle, where the 2 seams joined and nested rather nicely. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the needle. I have got a size 80 needle in here, just a regular size 80 needle, and it made a tiny little noise. It didn't struggle, but it made a little tiny noise as it went over the bump of that seam. And I will tell you that probably a better needle to use for this project would be a Microtex needle, because the Microtex needle is very sharp, and this is batik fabric, which is very tightly woven, and so that Microtex needle is going to pierce the fabric and have the needle sewing a little bit more easy. All right, so now we have our blocks all sewn together, 4 of them together, and the next thing you need to do is figure out what size your batting is going to be. So you are going to measure with your ruler from there down to here, just allowing for a 1/4 of an inch. So you're going to measure a 1/4 of an inch there and a 1/4 of an inch in here. And that diagonal measurement is the size of the square of batting that you're going to need. Now, it certainly could be fusible batting. I don't have any fusible batting, I don't believe. Maybe you're tucked away in a drawer somewhere. I don't know. Are you like me? You buy stuff all the time. Whenever you see it, you grab it, and sometimes I don't even know what I've got anymore. And when I do a tidy up, I think, oh wow, I forgot I ever bought that. So maybe I do have some fusible batting somewhere, but for the purposes of this little project that I'm showing you now, which is the granny square, and it is a quilt-as-you-go project, we are going to put our batting on, and my charm squares, of course, were 5 inches square, and this block happens to work out at 6 inches square. I'm not a math wizard, so I wouldn't be prepared to say that if you use 3-inch blocks, your square is going to be 4 inches square, your batting. I'm not sure. So just do a double check if you don't use 5-inch charm squares or 5-inch squares. If you use 4-inch or 6-inch or 7-inch or 8-inch, just do that little diagonal check, and then you will know what size to make your batting. Now, I could spray a little bit of glue underneath this or onto the back of my batting to make sure that this doesn't move. I could also pin it, but I'm just going to wing it, and I'm turning this over, and I need to change my needle. I've already broken one needle today because I was doing a decorative stitch on that 1/4 inch foot, which is a single hole needle, a single hole foot. And that didn't go so well. Let's just say I put a new needle in the machine. Okay, so what I have now put onto the machine is a ditch quilting foot. It's got this little guide in the middle of the foot, which I'm actually going to ride down in the ditch, which I have just stitched in stitching these blocks together. And I also want to choose a decorative stitch, so I am actually going to choose stitch number 18 on my machine, which is a rather nice sort of decorative stitch, not a zigzag, so it's not boring, but it is quite pretty. And what I'm wanting to actually do with this stitching that I'm doing right now, in essence, it is my quilting. And so I am quilting my block by doing this row of stitching, because it's going through my blocks and through my batting underneath. So right, I've come down to the other end. I'm going to take it out the machine, and this machine I have had for more than 20 years, probably about 25 years. It still sews as beautifully as the day I bought it, but one of the things that it is missing is a thread cutter. Oh my goodness, I miss that feature. So now I could do exactly the same stitch here, or I could change it to a different decorative stitch. Just depends how interesting you want your granny square to look. I'm actually just going to leave it at the same stitch that we used for the first row of quilting or decorative stitching. And I just wanted, with this little technique, to point out that you really don't have to do quilting only with a straight stitch. I found that actually really boring. We could have stitched in the ditch here with a straight stitch. You would not have seen this pretty decorative stitching, and it would have worked in terms of the quilting, but I find that boring. All right, so now we have our 4 squares sewn together and quilted with our block, with our batting. So now the next step we're going to do is we're going to fold the block in half, right sides together. And I'm going to come back here, take that foot off the machine and put my 1/4 inch foot back on, and then I need to change my stitch back to a 1/4 inch, and I am now going to sew down the 2 sides. Now, when I tell people to fold, they're not sure which way to fold, and I say think mountains. All right, you've got a peak a triangle pointing upwards with your batting once you fold it in half. So that is the way you want to fold your square, right sides together. And you can do a little reverse stitch there if you wish. And then we are going to do the other side as well. Match up your side seams as well as you can, and then do a 1/4 inch down that side as well. All right, and then we are going to take it out the machine and cut our thread again. And now what I'm going to do is, there's my squares where we thought mountains because we had a peak. Now I'm going to open out the open edge of the block. So can you see that? Here's the open edge of my block, and I am going to come here and line up my seam. And I'm just going to grab a clip. It was on the other table, so I'm going to pop a clip there. You could use a pin if you don't have those very fancy clips. I absolutely love them. And now what you're going to do is you're going to sew this closed. Now you are not going to be catching the batting in here. You're going to start at the side or at the edge, and you're going to do, oops, my thread has come unthreaded, so let's just very quickly thread it again. There we go. And I like to pull my thread to the back. Okay, so now we're going to sew our 1/4 inch seam, but we need to leave an opening to turn the square out. So I'm going to sew about halfway along that block, and then do a tiny little back stitch and take it out of the machine. And now I'm going to start from the other side, all right, where it's open, and I'm going to put my presser foot down, and I am going to sew again to about halfway along that block. Do a couple of little back stitches, and there we go. And so now I have an opening. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this block out through that opening. Okay, and we're just going to be very gentle about this, and I'll explain in a moment when I've got it fully turned out why you need to be gentle. And so I think we're almost there, yes. So now you can see that I have turned it out to the right side, and these edges along here, because of how we sewed the charm squares together, these are actually bias edges. So if you pull them, they actually stretch quite a bit. So you don't want to manhandle this when you're turning it out, because you may have sort of slightly warped edges, especially if you're going to be sewing a bunch of these together. So now, yes, we have an opening on the back, but this is where I often just use a little bit of fusible or double-sided tape, probably something fusible that will be a permanent fusing, and I just pop it in there and press it with my iron. So you can do that. Let me just see, I probably got a little bit here in the drawer below where I'm sitting. And so I'm going to put this steamer seam 2 inside on my fold, and then I had a little bit too much. And what I'm now going to do, it's got paper on one side and a gluey on the other side. So I'm just going to take it to my iron quickly and press it. And while I'm here, I'm pressing the whole block. And then I'm going to bring it back to the machine and show you that there is my paper. And obviously it fused down the gluey part. Let's just check that it did. Yes, it did. All right, so it's fused the gluey part onto my seam allowance. And now it's also pressure sensitive, so I can actually press it a little like that. And then I'm going to take it back to my iron and press it to make a permanent bond, and that works really nicely with cotton fabrics. Steamer Seam 2 doesn't always work so great with polyester fabrics. Some it works, some it doesn't. It'll stick, but it'll eventually come undone. So you could certainly do a little slip stitching along here if you prefer that. If you stitch with a machine, bear in mind it's going to show on the other side. So there we have a rather nice little mug rug finished, and we've used up 4 of our charm squares in one go. All right, I have got another one ready here, stitched, and my batting on the back, so in just a jiffy I could have 2 almost matching mug rugs. Now the other thing is I could then start sewing them together. So what I'm going to do is I'm very quickly going to finish this second one, which reinforces what I've been teaching, so you don't necessarily have to go back and watch the video again. So I'm going to sew down the side seam and take it out and sew down the other side seam, and our batting is pointing, the triangle of the batting is pointing upwards. So like I said, you think of a mountain peak. I've got my thread caught there. Think of a mountain peak, and then you will know how to position your stitching for the side seams. All right, so there we have that, and now I'm going to pull it open and I'm going to pin it with my clip, my trusty magic clip, and then once again I am going to come and I'm going to sew the second opening, or the opening, and once again my thread. That's why I always like to pull my threads to the back. All right, we'll do it in a moment. Oops, my thread came unthreaded again. It's sometimes quite hard to sew when you've got a camera and you don't want to get your hands in the way, because then you can't see what I'm doing, and sometimes because it's awkward I'll brush against my thread and it'll come unthreaded. All right, so here we go again. I said about halfway we will sew and then do a couple of little back stitches and take it out of the machine. And then we will do the same on the other side towards the middle of this opening on the second side of our block. It's another thing on this machine, I forget when I have switched on the reverse, I forget to switch it off. All right, and there we have it. Let's trim our threads again, take this clip off, and now if we turn it out to the front, and as I said, we do that gently because the edges around our block are actually on the bias, and then we just poke those corners out as gently as we can, and there we go. You can use a chopstick or some sort of a point turner for these corners if you wish. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to get another piece of that Steamer Seam 2 and put it into my block on this underside. Oh, that's just paper. That's not working very well. Let me get another one. Here we go. We need about that much. All right, so I'm going to put the Steamer Seam 2, and as I say, it's rather nice because it's pressure sensitive. So as I stick it down, I don't have to pin it or do anything else to it. It kind of stays in place. And now I'm going to take it to the iron and press that just behind the camera. All right. And then once it's pressed and the glue has adhered to the fabric, I can then peel off the paper. And I don't know about you, but I have found many times that it actually is better to wait to peel the paper off until it's not so hot from the iron, because what happens is it kind of sticks to the paper and it doesn't stay on the fabric. So there I have peeled the paper away, and I am just going to iron this last little bit, and there we are. All right, so now I have 2 blocks, and it doesn't matter whether you've got 2 or 24 blocks. This time I'm going to take that foot, the 1/4 inch foot, off the machine and put my ditch quilting foot back on. And now what you want to do is you want to have a stitch that is going to straddle both mats to basically sew them together. And I am going to just use the same stitch I used earlier. Actually, no, I'm not going to use that one. I want something that's got a little bit more fullness to it. So let's see what I will use. Quite a difficult choice. I think I am going to use the daisy. I don't know if it's going to be super successful, but we can certainly give it a try, and we'll know for future if it doesn't work or not. All right, so I am going to start stitching with my brown thread, and it's going to do a daisy shape, and I am making sure that my fabric is pushed together so there's no gap in between the fabric, and that my little guide of my ditch quilting foot is going right down the middle, and away I go all the way to the bottom. And I'm hoping that when I get to the bottom that my edges are going to join nice and evenly, because remember, those were bias edges and they may or may not meet up exactly if they got a bit stretched or didn't get a bit stretched. Okay, so I've got down to the end. I'm going to cut off my threads, and I'm going to come back and show you the daisy. All right, there is the daisy stitching. Now, if I pull it, it's actually not too bad. There's a little bit of a gap here at the top. So what I would do in that instance is I would just go and stitch another couple of daisies over that part. And that should solve my problem. All right, so there we have it. Obviously, you'll sew 2 together and another 2 together, and then you can come down here and sew the 4 together, and that makes a rather nice square placemat. You can keep going, and before long you'll have a table runner. And I have also done it with scraps of Christmas fabric the one year, and I just kept going and kept going until I had literally chopped up all my Christmas fabric that was large enough to cut 6-inch blocks. And then I sewed them all together, and I had a lovely Christmas throw for my couch in my lounge. And so that's another option that you can do. But here we have used up 8 of our charm squares, and we've quilted as we go. So once it's together like this, there's nothing more you need to do. You don't need to put anything around the edges, although if you feel that it's going to stretch out of shape, you could always come and put a binding on, but it is not a raw edge. So technically speaking, it does not need to have a binding. So I hope you enjoyed that little stash busting project. A good way to use up your 5-inch charm squares, but it's also a good way to use up your scraps. And as I say, remember, you don't have to have 5-inch blocks. That's the size block that a 5-inch charm square is going to yield. You're going to end up with a, let me just look, 6-inch block, all right, from 5-inch charm squares. So if my math is correct, if you cut 4-inch squares, you'd end up with 5-inch blocks. If you cut bigger squares, you'd end up with bigger blocks, which of course would go quicker. The smaller the blocks, the more you're going to need to piece together for placemats, runners, knee rugs, and so on. All right, so there we go. Just before I finish off the video, just to mention that below the video you will see links to my website, where I do have some classes that are paid classes, and I also have embroidery thread to sell, and I have books and patterns and some fabric. And then I also have a Facebook group. So if you've watched this video and you think, you know, Liz, I'm not getting what you said in the video, I'm a bit confused, no problem. Go to my Facebook group, which is Sew and Learn with Liz Thompson, and go there. You don't have to answer 20,000 questions to join the group. It's an open group, so just go in there and you're very welcome, and you can send me a question there. Obviously, of course, you can also send a question below this YouTube video. Okay, so thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope this has given you an idea to use up some of your stash. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.